Let's get some analysis now, political analysis. We'll speak to Sanusha Naidu on her reaction to the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa's January the 8th statement. Of course, today marking the anniversary of the founding of the ANC 109 years ago. So essentially today is the birthday of the ANC. Birthday celebrations were cancelled though, but the traditional speech still delivered by the President. The annual statement setting out the priorities for the next year. So Cyril Ramaphosa laying some of those out, saying firstly to overcome COVID-19. That is priority number one. And just talking about the ravages, the economic ravages, the problems because of COVID-19, talking about the vaccines, saying that health workers will be prioritized. But there is a goal to vaccinate the majority of South Africans to achieve herd immunity. Another goal to renew the ANC itself, talking about renewal also within ANC branches, talking about speaking to young people, becoming financially sustainable as well. So picking up some of the problems within the party itself and touching there importantly on corruption and what should happen to people who are implicated in corruption following a resolution that they should be suspended by the NEC. Sanusha Naidu joining us now. Sanusha Naidu, thank you very much. So your overall reaction, your overall impression of the January the 8th statement tonight?
Good evening, and good evening to the listeners. I think overall, I think the president touched on the key issues. I mean, he touched on all the right notes in terms of what a speech should be, highlighting both the kind of structural problems that we see, the social dislocation, the social cohesion challenges that are posed, the impact of COVID-19, the fact that the economy was in a state of paralysis even before the pandemic had exacerbated it. And of course, he talked about the fact that corruption is something that is non-negotiable, if you were to use that term, within the context of governance, within the party, and that the party can't hide behind the facade of unity. I think all of that was really important. And I think the idea of renewal, unity, reconstruction as a broad theme for this year, in the year of 2021, makes it very interesting. I think what kind of didn't really hit home for me in the speech was, have we not heard this all before? Have we not heard the idea that we need to have a more effective, a more capable, a more ethical, and a more developmental state, that governance should be actually about being the servants of the people, that you are in government because you are serving the people. I mean, all of these things are coming home in a way where it was said before, it was noted before, it was emphasized before. I think the challenge for the president is, what do you do with implementation? It's a colossal problem. Implementation has become a colossal issue. I think the whole question of the district development model, again, comes home in terms of how do you deal with a colossal problem that has been fermenting and manifesting over years, and it has just become now a serious level of an abyss, where it's just amplified itself in such unsustainable ways. Telling the private sector that they need to come to the party, telling the youth that we need to redefine and giving more kind of credence to the leagues and to the branches, etc. Is how does this party now go on this path of renewal? And I think that's the bigger colossal challenge in the room.
Maybe the elephant in the room going into this was Ace Magashule, the Secretary General, implicated in corruption, facing a trial. The ANC at a previous NEC meet made a resolution that such persons will present themselves to the ethics committee. He did, but can also be suspended. And even the integrity committee saying he didn't give a great answer to them. Was he strong enough on that issue? I mean, he didn't shy away from it. He said that the NEC will soon release guidelines around implementing that resolution, suggesting he really wants to push ahead.
Indeed. And I think that's a good point, theoretically speaking. I think on paper, it's fantastic to say he's giving us some kind of indication of what's happening internally in respect of that resolution and what needs to be put in place. What I find a bit disconcerting is that resolution and from previous resolutions from previous elective conferences came in 2017. It builds on the previous resolutions from previous elective conferences. Why is it that you still have to create guidelines? I would have imagined that these guidelines would have already been in place once those resolutions have been adopted. And so you shouldn't be going back to the drawing board to say, right, we adopted the resolution, now we have to create it. It's taken you a year to create guidelines. I find that to be a little bit of an offsetter for me, because I think then I become a little bit less prone to say, okay, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. And I think, well, internally, maybe you didn't have the kinds of levels of putting these guidelines into place there, or other structural challenges that needed to be sorted out. And we know what those structural challenges are. Let's not hide behind any kind of facade and say that, call it like what it is. And that is the internal fragmentation and power battles and fractions that are basically just completely falling over themselves in terms of what these battlegrounds mean within the ANC. So I think that in itself makes it more difficult, because it either indicates two things. It either indicates that finally now the president of the party has some leverage where he can push these guidelines forward, or it suggests that they're going to go back to the drawing board to try and perhaps create a more kind of acceptable levels of guidelines that would be acceptable, and perhaps even try and be much more of a not a kind of punitive one, but rather one that's kind of an agreement to everybody, which will be soft in its implementation. And that kind of scares me.
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't this just reveal to you that there's a political battle going on about implementing that previous resolution?
Absolutely. I mean, I could not agree. I mean, I think Ace Magashule kind of just knew that this was not going to happen anytime soon. So he could go on national TV, he could speak, he could say, I can do what the ANC asked me to do. But I think he kind of understood that this is where the ANC falls on its sword. When it comes to the resolutions, some are implementable, some go forward, they are fast track, others that are basically kind of acute and have very, very acute implications for the party, particularly when you're drawing out big names like the Secretary General, then of course it becomes a much more contested ground.
Do you think he dealt well with talk of renewing the ANC? I mean, he mentioned things like speaking directly to young people. It's often been noted that there are not a lot of young leaders in cabinet, in governance right now. Renewing the ANC Youth League, the Women's League, and making the branches themselves stronger. All those cultural issues maybe coming up from the branches.
I think when it comes to the youth question or the youth factor for the party, I mean, we've seen this youth league, and in the context of other branches and constituencies and leagues in the party, they've been drifting for a while now, and that drift has meant that they also have to reconsider where they position themselves in society. I think with the apathy and the disaffection that you see amongst the millennial generation that currently resides in our society, they don't have any loyalty. They don't have any kind of hark back to say, well, I want to be with the ANC because I think this is a party that represents me. I think that kind of renewal has to be done in terms of a much more aggressive way in which you're going to bring the youth back into the party. And if you're bringing the youth back into the party, you've got to reassess your leadership in the party, because the leadership in the party in many ways is disconnected, not just from the youth, is disconnected from their own constituencies, disconnected from ordinary South Africans, because it seems to me that they're talking a language which doesn't necessarily resonate with the youth. The youth are much more about the here and now and the vision for tomorrow and the future. And if you're sitting at over 50% of unemployment in the youth constituency of the population of the country, then you are sitting with a time bomb waiting to explode. And I think we don't want to end up in a situation where you want to renew the party, but you still want to stick to an old way. I think he spoke about modernization. I'd be very curious in terms of what this modernization means. Yeah. I think what will be really nice for me to see in a party like this is, how do you renew yourself based on the idea that less is better than more?
All right, interesting concept. What about economic renewal? You're talking about things like unemployment, things like COVID-19, what it's left us with, and there were problems to start with. Again, did he give you enough detail? He said they are aggressively implementing the most recent plan, but not sort of stating what infrastructure projects are. Maybe that was beyond the scope of this specific statement.
I agree. I think this statement is really about setting the tone, the theme for what the party will do in going forward with the local government elections. He emphasized the local government elections is critical. You can't ignore it. It has a critical dimension in the body politic of the country. I think you're right. I think he can't necessarily go forward and put into greater detail the roadmap that will actually bring about. He spoke about the investment conference. He touched on the COVID grant, the relief grants that were implemented last year. He spoke about this renewal of the economy and the growth of the economy. What I perhaps think needs to be much more critically, and I think we have to go back and look at the policy documents that were released at the end of last year, which will inform the National General Council meeting later in the year that will be held. But I think what is important here is if you're talking about a renewal of the economy, you've got to pick certain sectors. He spoke a little bit about the energy issue, about energy generation and looking at how that will boost a kind of bottom-up approach. But again, I think this idea of repurposing the state-owned enterprises has to be much more than just a repurposing. What are you repurposing it for? How it's going to actually address the economic issues that are currently residing in the country that underpin an economic dislocation? But how are you going to deal with inequality? How are you going to deal with poverty? How are you going to actually roll out to those communities where people are not necessarily having access to water, sanitation, which is now just become a serious developmental crisis of the state? So this idea of a developmental state is very far beyond from where we should be. But he needs to be much more clearer about this repurposing. Also bearing in mind is that we're seeing the entire global economy contracting. I think the World Bank report speaks about less than 5% in terms of where we are going. This contraction in the global economy means that there's something that's not right in the economic model. And I think the economic model needs to be reviewed. And perhaps that is where your renewal needs to come from as well. I think we're following the trickle-down effect. We're following the top-down approach, the export-led based focus of an economic development model, which we are seeing now that it's not really coming out to par because there's a lot of inherent contradictions around the model. So this idea of growth, this growth has to be something that has to be dealt with in terms of how this growth model has to be, according to the economic renewal, has to be defined by where does this growth take place? It takes place in South Africa, but who is going to be the driver of that growth, and where does the consumption of that growth come from?
Well, for the state to be the driver, it needs to be a strong state. And he was picking up on some of the things you've mentioned, the developmental state, the idea of that. It was interesting that he said the ANC is still the best bet for the development at a local government level, but also looking at the problems of local governance. That's where you have your service delivery issues, saying municipalities were left, they were unsustainable after apartheid. But I think the ANC has addressed this before over years. It said there's too much political deployment, not enough skills at a municipal level. Was there enough recognition tonight for you that that's really where things could change and make a real difference in people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I said less is better, I meant that you have to think about a leaner government. A government that is effective, ethical, and puts the developmental state front and center, but doesn't have to be as bloated as we see this bureaucracy being. Starting off with a leaner set of government strategies, leaner set of governance implementation, because I think what we are seeing here is that there are too many overlaps. The bureaucracy is overlapping from the national to the provincial to the local government. And the local government is where I think a lot of these tensions around who gets onto candidate lists, who makes the MEC, who makes these, takes on these positions at the local government level. There's that transactional value that just doesn't take place. And I think to a large extent, we have to start thinking about redefining what local government means, not necessarily changing how we implement, but redefining the focus of governance and basically saying to ourselves is, do we need so many kinds of MECs? Do we need so many bureaucratic spaces that take up a lot of the consumption of state resources? I think we can be much more innovative. I think that the interesting thing for me after 2020 is that 2021 allows you to be innovative in how you want to govern. And governance becomes not just about following the same old, or saying there's a new normal, but going back to the same old, but rather being innovative. I am always reminded of Patrice Lumumba's quote, the future is that you dare to invent it according to how you see your structural conditions. And I think, that's what we need. We need that kind of recognition that we are going to build the trust, but how do you build the trust if you're not basically being much more clearer and coherent about what the challenges are? Because I think at that level, we don't want the same old candidates to go out and lobby and make promises, because we know those promises are very, very far from being implemented and fulfilled.
All right, thank you so much for your time tonight. Political analyst Sanusha Naidu unpacking the January the 8th statement, the traditional anniversary speech said by the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa.